I thought I'd talk today about pure imagination. They say that this is a thought-produced universe. It's one of the scientific precedents that, and one of the religious precedents that we create our own universe with our thinking. And from my experience, that's certainly true. When I look back at my life, when I look back at my 53-year sojourn on this spinning planet, I recognise that pretty much everything good, bad and indifferent is what I created myself, very, very powerfully. For the first half of my life, I didn't really know who I was, so I didn't really know who was creating the universe. If it's a thought-created universe, who's doing the thinking? Because it's not just one of us, is there? Geoff said that everybody was a crowd. Everyone was filled with several personalities, hundreds of personalities, he believed. So we could have a jealous personality, an envious personality, a greedy personality, a violent personality, a fundamental personality, a bigoted personality, a happy personality, a generous personality. We could have a philanthropic personality. We can have lots of different identities, or what Jung called shadows, or what Eckhart Tolle called pain bodies. We've all got loads of them. I certainly recognise them in myself. I hear them talking. There's less and less these days because I know who I am. I've identified my authentic self, and my life at the moment is about expanding that authentic self into this vessel so that I have a top dog there at all times, and that top dog serves God, serves directly to the source. In the Mahabharata, the Hindu Bible, we have a battle between good and evil represented by the Pandava brothers and by the Kaurava brothers. The top of the Pandava brothers, who represent the good brothers, is Yudhisthira. He represents the top dog, and he talks directly to the rishis, and he talks directly to God. And all the time throughout his life, throughout their journey, his integrity, his morality, his self-control, his essence is challenged, it's tested. In Old English, the word test means to separate, is to heat metal and separate the impure from the pure. So when we say tested, we're talking about the fact that we are purifying ourselves. So Yudhisthira represented the top dog. So we all have a top dog within ourselves, and that top dog needs to, if we have other personalities, if other personalities are present, we have to unify them. We have to bring them as one so that they're working as a pack, not working as disparate identities that we don't even recognise. Jung and Freud talked a lot about the fact that the separate identities, the separate archetypes, or the separate pain bodies, or whatever you want to call them, they were separated by buffers of defence mechanism because it were parts of us that we didn't want to look at. I mean, nobody wants to look at themselves and think I'm a thief, or nobody wants to look at themselves and think I'm a liar or an adulterer, or they don't want to think of themselves as dishonest or greedy or whatever. They don't want to look at themselves like that. And so what we do sometimes is, to protect ourselves, is we create a defence mechanism, and we separate ourselves from that part of us that we don't want to see. It's normally just a temporary thing. It just gives a little bit of it gives us a little bit of respite, because like I said, it's very difficult to look at ourselves and think, am I really a bigot? Am I really a thief? I know when I've spoke to people before who fiddle their tax, and they don't see themselves as thieves, but that's what they're doing. They don't see themselves as liars, but of course that's what they're doing, because you have to tell lies and you have to steal. You have to steal from, if you're paying tax, you have to steal from the government. So they don't see themselves like that. So what they do is they create a defence mechanism. They rationalise what they're doing, and they say, oh, it's okay because everybody did it. Somebody downloads illegal music or illegal films from the internet, and they call it pirating, but pirating, is stealing. But people don't want to see themselves as thieves, so they rationalise it. They'll say, well, everybody does it, it's okay to do it, and anyway, these companies make millions of pounds, and all the normal weak rationalisation that people use. So the defence mechanisms separate us from the different parts of us that we don't want to look at. My premise and my life has been about looking at those parts of me that are uncomfortable. I write about them, I talk about them, I kind of explore them, I bring them to the surface, I communicate with them. Ken Wilber talks about, he calls this communicating with shadow. So sometimes I literally communicate with these parts of me. The main thing is that they need to be, if not tamed, as it says in The Life of Pi, then at least trained. We need to train these parts of us. We need to have sovereignty over these parts of us. People have this idea that they can change the world, even if they haven't got the discipline to change their socks once a day. They have this idea that they can change the world, and it's a fantastical idea, and it's very true. But they think they can do that while they still can't change their diet or change their habits. They want to go out and solve the problems of the world, but they don't recognise that the problems of the world are reflected in them. They want to go out and challenge fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, or they want to go out and challenge, corruption in politics, or they want to go out and, challenge whatever the wrong is in the world at the moment, but they can't do it within their own body. They haven't got union, or they haven't got peace within their own body. They haven't got peace within their own community, within their own household. I've got friends that want to take on fundamental terrorists, but they can't solve the problems they've got with their own wife. They can't solve the problems they've got within their own body. So I'm interested in this. This isn't a judgment. This is me talking and saying this is a very exciting time, because we are able to look and say the problems in the world are the problems in us. If we have a pilot light of rage because we see a corrupt politician, we just need to come back to ourselves. What does that reflect in us? Emanuel Swedenborg called this the law of correspondence. What we see out there is what corresponds with what's in us. So if we have a pilot light of rage, or a pilot light of anger, or a pilot light of judgment, and we feel like we need to go out there and challenge the world, we just need to really look at what that's reflecting in us. That's what I do. I look at it and think, okay, you look at, say, if you look at fundamental religion and terrorism, you think, God, that's outrageous, that's terrible. If I'm really honest with myself, I look inside myself, there is parts of me that still want to rape and pillage. Just recently when I had people attacking members of my family very unkindly, part of me came forward and wanted to destroy people. So it's no good me going out there and trying to take on fundamentalism when I still have that in myself. I've seen people that say, I don't like the way this religion or this cult or this caste treats women. I don't like the way they do that. But the same person will go on the internet and watch sexual porn, or they'll imagine themselves having sex with their neighbour or their friend, or they'll have a subtle but very controlling relationship on their wife, or they'll have a demeaning opinion of women generally in the world. So when we have that feeling of extreme reaction, it's normally because there's something corresponding in us. But that's certainly been the case for me. When you look at corrupt politicians, you think, am I being completely honest in everything in my own life? No, I'm not. I need to work on that. I need to look at that. The great thing about the law of correspondence, I know I'm diverting a little bit, but the great thing about the law of correspondence is that the law of correspondence says to us, everything is your teacher. Everyone is your teacher. We are surrounded by teachers. It's it's a very powerful message. We are surrounded by teachers. We can look at an oak tree and we can see a perfect business model. We can look at somebody that's living their life in the wrong way, and if we're reacting to that and we feel anger and judgment towards that, we've got a teacher. We've got someone that's saying to us, that's still in you. If it wasn't in you, it wouldn't correspond. It's still there in you, so you can go away and work on that. And it takes a tremendous degree of self-honesty, and it takes a tremendous degree of courage to look at yourself and say, yeah, there's a part of me that's still very fundamental. There's a part of me that's still very judgmental. There's a part of me that's still jealous. There's a part of me, that's still needs to be worked on, that's still envious or greedy. There's a part of me that that says the world is abundant, we can do anything we want, but there's another part of me that just says that's a load of rubbish, that doesn't work, that's not pragmatic, even though I know it is. So I'm aware of the conflicts, and I'm aware of the divides within myself. That's all I need to be interested in. So whether you look at the Mahabharata, the Srimad Bhagavatam, whether you look at the Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Nanak, whether you look at Buddhism, Gautama, whether you look at the Tao Te Ching, wherever you look at the Christian texts, if you look at the Torah, if you look at Judaism, which is the Torah, or if you look at Christianity, the Old Testament, the New Testament, if you look at the Quran, whatever you look at, they're all saying exactly the same. Heaven and hell is within you. It's all about what's in you. If you don't change yourself, you can't change anything out there. You might labour away and you might work really hard, but you're still working at a low level of consciousness. While you're still judging people and while you're still looking for the problems out there, you're still at a low level of consciousness. So again, please don't think this is a judgment. This is what I'm working on with myself, and this is what I've learned so far on this Sojum, that if I can change myself, I can change the world. It's very difficult to change yourself. It's much easier to project out and say, he's doing it wrong, she's doing it wrong, they're doing it wrong. He's terrible, she's terrible, they're terrible. That's really easy, and everybody does it. Go on the World Wide Web and you'll see all of the minnows and all of the sheep doing that. It's very easy. I love that part in the Holy Quran, in the Muhammad's life, where he's in the village and his warriors are coming back from a war. Some of them are dismembered, some of them are dying, some of them are, mortally wounded, and they're all kind of perversely proud of their battle scars. And Muhammad is clapping his hands, saying, well done on the small jihad. And they're all outraged. What do you mean small jihad? Some of us have got limbs missing, some of us are mortally wounded, some of us are dying, some of us have already died. What do you mean small jihad? And Muhammad's, one of the things he said was that the big jihad is to work on the inside, not on the outside. The big jihad is to work on absolution from the inside out, not from the outside in. It's much easier for me to go and stand on a nightclub door and fill people in than it is to look at my fear of forgiving somebody. How difficult is it to forgive somebody? How difficult is it to even approach forgiving somebody, especially if they've attacked you, especially if they've attacked your family, especially if they've attacked your friends? It's so difficult, but that's where it's juicy. That's where I'm excited. That's what we really need to be looking at. Cleansing the self. In some of the very old Bibles, like the Torah, like the 5 books of Moses, they talk a lot about the devil, the Satan, and in Old Greek that the word meant divide. It meant the devil meant divide. It meant somebody that was divided against themselves. So when we have that devil in us, it's because we are divided against ourselves. We have personalities within us that are conflicted. We are, continually arguing with ourselves, but it's so subtle and we're so used to it that we don't notice it anymore. So we're walking around with one voice saying one thing and another voice saying another thing, and we walk around as though we're sane, but we're not. We are out of balance. We are filled with Satan. We're filled with divide. That's okay if you can see that, because if you can see that, you can identify the authentic self, which is in Hinduism they call it the looker. Eckhart Tolle calls it the observer, or I think it's known as the Atman or the soul. There's a part of us that is observing all the time. That's the authentic self, and that authentic self is what we use to move energy around our body. Some people call it energy chi. We move it around the body, and we move the energy out of the body when we're creating the real world. So we create through a combination of will and imagination. That's what we need to do. Now, in the early days, when I was conflicted and divided against myself, and I was 10 different personalities, some of them nice, some of them not so nice, some of them strong, some of them insecure, I used my imagination to either put myself in bed with depression and think that the world is a terrible place, or I put myself onto a nightclub door and battered people. When what excited me about this was the fact that my imagination was so powerful. I created situations, I created realities where violence was a nightly occurrence. That was because my imagination was so powerful, because I identified an insecure part of me as being my authentic self, and it wasn't an authentic self. It was an insecure ghost. It was an insecure personality trait, and I traced it right the way back to being abused when I was a kid, being told by somebody when I was a child that nobody could be trusted, not even those that you love, especially those that you love. So I've got this kind of insecure part that is, I've allowed it to become a top dog, and I've gone onto nightclub doors, and I've gone into martial arts, and I've learned how to kill people in several different languages. And then I went out and I was a hugely violent man in thousands of violent altercations, in hundreds of fights, without any exaggeration. I created a hell, even though I'm in this heavenly place. I've got this heavenly potential. That part of me, because of perception, it perceived the world to be dark. It went out and it created from that dark place. That is very exciting. The reason that's exciting is because I know categorically, without any doubt, that I created that negative reality with my thinking, even though it's come from something that's been done to me. Somebody abused me. I don't suppose I can be blamed for that. All I can look at is how I reacted to that and what I did with that. What I did was built myself an armory and went out and attacked the world. It's called, in psychology, in Freudian psychology, it's called transference. So somebody at a young age abuses you, says to you, nobody can be trusted, not even those you love, especially those you love. What you do as an older person is you transfer that onto everybody you meet. Anybody that pretends to be nice, anybody that says they're nice, or anybody that who comes towards you, who wants to be trusted, cannot be trusted. So you end up being very violent for no other reason than a false perception. That's what happened to me, and I used transference everywhere. I didn't trust anybody. At one stage, when I was first married, if my wife left the room, I thought she would be betraying me on the phone to somebody, or there would be betrayal, because betrayal was in me. How powerful is that? It created bars around me. I was living in a beautiful house, but I was surrounded by bars because I didn't trust anybody. And that's because that old perception, which I needed to look at and dissolve, was coming forward. It was being top dog, it was being the caretaker in this vessel, and from that negative place, with pure imagination, it was creating a hell where I could be in a heaven. When I realised the power of my imagination and the power of what I'd been creating, I completely reversed it. I started to look at these old parts of me. I started to challenge these old parts of me. This is called cognitive therapy, where you go in and you challenge these old beliefs. And I dissolve these old beliefs. I wrote about them, I talked about them, I brought them into the light, I gave them light. I communicated with them. Sometimes I would say to them, I can feel you, I can feel this energy in me, I can feel this anger, this rage. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? There is no life in my body. You are an aberration. But I'm going to find an outlet for you. And sometimes these parts of me would say, I want to be in a film, I want to be in a book, I want you to find a creative outlet, I want infinity, I want life outside of you in a creative outlet. So I'd write a film, I'd write a book. And it took a lot of courage, because it was, you're very afraid. We are all very afraid to look at the parts of us that we perceive as being dark. We are all afraid of looking at the Frankenstein that's within us, and we all create our own monsters. What I've learned to do with my life is to look at that, because I want to create from pure imagination. I want to create with a very powerful will. You need a very powerful will. I want to create from clear intuition. God speaks to us through intuition, and he acts through our will. So our intuition needs to be sharp, it needs to be clear, so we get good direction, and our will needs to be very strong so that we can activate that in the world. No, it's no good getting an intuition to write a play or to build a house or to get healthy if we haven't got the will to do that. And this is what I said at the beginning. People think that they can, struggle with the ordinary, but somehow in their mind's eye they think they can create the extraordinary. First of all, we have to master the mundane. We have to get hold of our palate. We have to get our palate right, and this is how we exercise our will. And don't forget, the will is what you're going to use to create a universe. It isn't going to happen in a void. You use your will to do that. You develop your will and you hone your will by mastering the palate. It's one of the most difficult things to do. As you master the palate, as you cleanse with food, with the right food and the right intake, as you cleanse yourself, you'll find that as the cells in your body start to cleanse, old shadows will be released, and they will come up and they will present themselves. They will try and take over as top dog, but they will present themselves to be exorcised, to present themselves to be released, to be dissolved. They'll present themselves to be transformed. So as I started to cleanse my diet, as I started to eat healthy, as I started to watch, everything that I ingested, what I watched on television, what I ate, what I drank, who I spoke to, the books I read, I cleansed myself. As I cleansed myself, old shadows came up in the form of fear, in the form of anger, in the form of greed, in the form of rage. They presented themselves to me, and because I understood it, I found them a creative outlet through this, what Dante Alighieri calls the horn of the chest. We create through the heart chakra. So I would bring it through here, and I would create, and I would write it into a play or a book. I'd put it into a training session. I can transform it into pure love if I've got the wherewithal to do it, even though sometimes it does trip you up, sometimes it does batter you. So we need to get the food right. The food is important, but the food isn't enough on its own. It's just one of the elements. What you eat, what you drink, what you ingest, what you read, who you talk to, your influences. Your reality is built up and maintained and sustained by about 400 bits of information, according to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, that we take in every day. We're presented with about 4 million bits of information. Most of it's processed unconsciously, but we only really kind of utilize about 400 bits of this information. And with that 400 bits of information, we constitute a reality. If our reality is coming from the newspapers and coming from the news, the bad news, the further bad news, if it's coming from negative conversations, gossip, if it's coming from anger and hate, if it's coming from the usual source, your reality is going to be one of lack. Your reality is going to be one of repression. Your reality is going to be one of prejudice. Your reality is going to be one of anger. It's going to be one of judgment. It's going to be one of it's going to be a reality based on, like what you maybe would call a tabloid reality. It's going to be a reality based on the easiest, lowest common denominator information. You can change that. You don't have to take your information from the morning news. You don't have to take your information from the tabloids. You don't have to take your information from the bloke at work. You don't have to take your information from your mum and dad or your friends or your teachers. You don't have to take your information from the usual places. There is a vast array of information out there at the moment that you can access. There are portals of reality out there that you can access, absolute portals. Here's a for instance. People think there's not opportunity, they think there's not information, they sit and they just take in the stuff that's spewed out, from the normal sources every single day, and they wonder why they keep creating the same reality. Just imagine that you've read a quote, and the quote is, I don't know, maybe the quote's from Yudhisthira, or maybe the quote's from Arjuna, or maybe the quote's from, so you've got a little quote, the self is the self's only enemy, the self is the self's only friend, and it's from Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So you look at that quote and you just think, well, it's just a quote, but actually that quote is a portal to a vast reality of information. How much information do you want? There's a vast reality, there's a vast portal of information behind that quote. So you pick up a pamphlet that gives you an extract from the Bhagavad Gita. The pamphlet which the Hare Krishna people give out leads you to the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavad Gita is a tome. So you pick up the Bhagavad Gita and you read the Bhagavad Gita, which is about Arjuna going into battle to win back his kingdom from his corrupt cousins. So you read the Bhagavad Gita and you think, that's really exciting, that's given me something, because it's a parable. It's a story about it's a story about the fact that we have to go into battle with our influences. We have to dissolve our conditioning to live in the world. So you get the Bhagavad Gita and you think, I've really read something now, that's really something. And then of course you speak to a devotee, or some maybe a Hindu guy, and he says, oh yeah, well, the Bhagavad Gita is just one chapter in the Mahabharata. So you think, oh right, so you go back and you pick up the Mahabharata, and the Mahabharata's like this, it's a big tome and it's intimidating. So you think, well, I need to set a few weeks aside to look at this, but you're excited, but you're intimidated because you're thinking, there's a vast array of information in here, and it's written by some of the greatest sages that ever lived. But it's also scary because you're going to read things that that going to unearth parts of you didn't really want to look at, and it's going to tell you your potential. So you get the Mahabharata, you take it on holiday with you, you sit and read the Mahabharata, and it takes you 2 weeks to read it, but you think, God, I've read it, it's really good, and then you feel quite pleased with yourself, and you think, I know a few things, I've learned a few things from this, I've learned a few things about me. And then of course you realise that the Mahabharata is just one small section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is 12 volumes, 18 books, and the first volume is that big. I think there's something like 34,000 cantos, and it is the fruit of the Vedas. And the Vedas were written 5,000 years ago by some of the greatest people that ever strolled on this planet. And it talks about everything from politics to sex to money, to the universe, the microcosm, the macrocosm. It's one of the most exciting tomes you ever get. So you end up, with me, my children bought me a copy of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's just filled to the brim with knowledge, and it helps you to expand your core beliefs. It helps you to expand what they call the second self, the internal parent, so that you get a greater connection between yourself and your soul. It helps to convert the parts of you that are negative, that are envious, that are greedy, the sub-personalities that don't want to be converted, that are difficult, that, there's parts of you that want to go to hell in a handbasket, and there are other parts of you that want to go to heaven. The parts of you that want to live in heaven, the parts of you that are quite happy dabbling about in hellish realities. So we have to convert those parts of us. We don't need to go out in the world to do that. I'm not saying that you can't go out into the world, because people do. It can be part of it. But we just need to work on ourselves. So how much do you want? All this stuff just helps you to develop your own pure imagination. It also helps you to develop your will, because to sit and read these tomes, to educate yourself, takes a tremendous act of will, and it's the will that you're going to use to create in the world. So how much information do you want? The Srimad Bhagavatam leads back to the Vedas, which is an infinite amount of knowledge written by the holy priests way back 5,000 years ago. Similarly, you can pick up you can get a quote, from the Torah. The world was created in 7 days, and a lot of people like to attack that. It's quite a delicious thing to attack, because it seems an impossibility, because people read these things literally. But maybe it's not meant literally. When I read the Torah, or when I look at these books, if I take that one quote and think, where did that quote come from? And I pick up a copy of the Holy Bible, and I see that the first 5 books are written by Moses, and they were called the Torah. And they talk about the creation of the earth. Then I think, I want to know a bit more about that. So I buy a book just on the Torah, which is a big tome like that, which my friend Warner bought me. And then you think, well, that's really interesting, but I want to know more about that. There's more. It's leading on to more. So then you maybe you look at like the Arcana Celestia, which is a 12-volume book just about Genesis, just about Exodus, which is the first 2 books, and this is Emanuel Swedenborg's version of what these Bibles mean. It just gives you an alternative. So suddenly you're looking at it and thinking, and Emanuel Swedenborg's had this divine epiphany, and he's saying, well, of course the 7 days of creation are not really about the world being created in 7 days. It's just a metaphor for the 7 stages of man's development, from a selfish clod serving himself right up to this selfless server of God, someone that's serving from pure love. It's about how we develop, and it talks about the fact that the whole actually this is my interpretation of reading the Torah. The whole Torah is really just a psychotherapeutic exercise in going from nirvana losing nirvana, becoming conflicted, and finding nirvana through purification of the self, through the journey. And this can be seen in Joseph Campbell, which was portrayed very well in Star Wars. So how much do you want? People say there's not enough information out there, or there's not enough opportunities out there, or the potential's not there. But the potential is there to grow, to expand your authentic self, to contract your egoic self. As we contract the egoic self, the authentic self expands. As the authentic self expands, the egoic self contracts. And I like the fact that people laugh at self-help and self-personal development. I like the fact they laugh at it, because if they didn't laugh at it, it wouldn't be real. They laugh at it because it's easier to laugh at it than it is to look at it. It's the most difficult thing you will ever encounter. Muhammad was right when he said that the big jihad is the internal jihad. It's the greatest challenge that you'll ever take on. And I've got to tell you, it's brought me at times to my knees, weeping on my knees and begging God for guidance and for help. It is very, very challenging. When I read Gurdjieff, I had a rush of depression, because I looked at it and saw so much truth in Gurdjieff's Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. A difficult book to read, but full of truths that are very difficult to look at, because it's saying this is about you. Lift the self by the self. Never let the self droop down. The self is the self's only enemy. Self is the self's only friend. It's much easier to go out there and fight enemies than it is to look at yourself and purify yourself. It's much easier to judge others than to judge yourself. We need to keep looking, we need to keep purifying. So we find the authentic self. We expand the authentic self. When the authentic self is expanded, we use that to create in the world. It will take a very strong will to keep the authentic self housed in this vessel. It takes a very strong will, because you're going to have to work on sovereignty over the self. And sovereignty over the self is more powerful than sovereignty over 10,000 armies, according to Lao Tzu, which has been I believe this as well. And it's an ongoing thing. It might take more than this lifetime, but we need to move towards it. And when we move towards it, we will get assistance. The right books will come, the right tutorage will come. You'll get visible teachers, you'll get invisible teachers, you'll get guidance, and it will be challenging. Some days you'll wake up and feel as though you can't get out of bed. Other days you'll wake up and feel as though you can change the whole world. So once we identify the authentic self, and the authentic self is clear when you know it, because it's always the part of you that wants to serve other people. It wants to serve God, or it wants to serve from a place of love. It wants to serve just for the joy of serving. That's the authentic self, and we've all bumped into that on several occasions. You only have to bump into it once to identify it. Once you've identified it, you can expand it. As you expand it and start pushing out the egoic selves, that would be what is classed as the war or the battle. In the Bhagavad Gita, it was called the battle of Guru, etc. That battle is all about purification. That battle is all about winning our kingdom back from our negative influences, from our conditioning. And it's a great challenge. But once we have the authentic self, once we have connected to the soul, to our purpose, or to God, or to the breath of God, then we create from that place. We create from the authentic self. So then we can say, okay, what do I want to create? What is it that I want to do? Do I want to build an orphanage in India, or do I want to create a hub and put books out all across the world to serve people? Do I want to serve people, just within the family? Do I want to serve people just by being balanced and by being non-judgmental? Do I want to put a rocket into space? Everybody's got to find their own purpose, their own true will. But once we're doing it from an authentic place, you'll know what that is, because you'll be guided by intuition. You'll know how to do it because you'll have the will to do it. The will is very, very important, and that from my experience, that's never going to be taken away from you. Your free will to choose what you do with what you've got. Then we can start creating. Then we're really starting to cook on glass. We're really starting to cook on gas. It wouldn't be good to cook on glass, would it? That's not good at all. So we really start to cook on gas then. So there are parts of us that need to be converted. There are parts of us that do not believe this. There are parts of us that we hear in the background speaking to us that think this is a load of shit. Those are the parts that we need to convince. Those are the parts we need to change. Those are the parts we need to dissolve. Those are the parts we need to love. Those are the parts we might need to go to war with. And we do that, we simply start doing that by getting our palate right. But be careful. I've seen people get their palate right, and then I've seen old shadows come up because it's been released from the cells, and they've let those shadows take over them. And instead of serving people, they've damaged people. Instead of helping people, they've hurt people. Instead of offering love and salvation to people, they've attacked people because they've mistaken this identity that's come up as their top dog, as their authentic self. The authentic self never wants to hurt anybody, not in any way. You could always tell if it's the authentic self. If it's guiding you towards something that's going to hurt other people, I would say it's not the authentic self. When I spoke to Gandhi in a meditation once, I said to him, how can I grow? He said, make yourself small. And I spoke to Uri Geller on the phone once, and I said to him, how can I grow? He said, expand. Both of them were telling me the same thing. Expand the authentic self, contract the egoic self. We know they're there. We need to identify them. We need to write them down on a piece of paper. I'm still struggling with jealousy. I'm still struggling with anger. I'm still struggling with judgment. I'm still struggling with greed. I've still got a sparsity mentality. Whatever it is, it's different for everybody. Keep an open mind, and if you want the information's there. There's no elitism. There's nobody trying to block you. You can go on the World Wide Web now and access all the information. Then it's about developing a strong enough will to convert the information. So we use our will and our imagination to create the reality and the universe that we want to create. And we do it for one reason and one reason only. We do it because we want to serve God. If you look at Guru Nanak from Sikhism, his whole philosophy was about serving God, or serving from a place of love, about serving the community. Sikhism was developed because Guru Nanak looked at the people around him, and he saw lots of incongruency, lots of people who were talking religion but not living religion, and he wanted to create an authentic religion that served people. So there are 10 gurus in the Sikh faith, and they've all carried this same message: serve God, do it from a place of love. If you look at the Mahabharata, the Hindu faith, it's exactly the same: serve God. You know, don't ignore don't ignore reality. There's a great scene in the Mahabharata where the Rishi's talking to Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira is the king of the world. He says to him, are you enjoying, living in the world? He said, never neglect profit for religion, never neglect religion for profit, and never neglect religion and profit for greed, which tempts all men. He was saying that we have to be great caretakers. If we are the king of the world, which we are in this body, we have this platform, we have this wonderful opportunity to serve the world. If we are the king of our world, then we need to make sure that we serve people. We're caretakers. That doesn't mean having money, it doesn't mean not having money. It means whatever you have, whatever comes through you, you use it to serve people, you use it to put out there. But it's no good ignoring it. It's no good looking at it and saying money's dirty, or the people with money, you've got people with money, people without money, and they're both kind of arguing about as to who's right and who's wrong. Neither is right or wrong. It's all about your intent, and it's all about what you do with that energy and how you serve with that energy. It takes a great soul, a great character to be able to handle any form of energy and keep it flowing and be generous with it. So then if you look at Islam, at the end of the Quran, Allah says, he talks about the fact that for every difficulty they will give you one easy. Your back will be girded, your fame will be elevated, you'll be given assistance, but make sure that you labour hard and give everything back to God. Everything you do, offer over to God. In other words, serve from a place of love. This is selfless service. So whether you're looking at, whether you're looking at Hinduism or Sikhism, and I'm not an expert on any of these are just my own observations, or Buddhism or Christianity. I mean, the top end of Buddhism is exactly the same. The Dalai Lama said, the greatest thing you can do is serve other people selflessly, but don't worry about giving things away, because everything you give away selflessly will return to you. So every single faith is telling us exactly the same thing. Every single faith is saying to us, serve from a place of love.